Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping straight into the Bible today to unpack a really incredible daily bread devotion titled Don't Ignore What God Has Shown You. If you've ever felt that sudden, quiet realization that something in your life just needs to change, well, this Explainer is going to completely reframe how you look at that experience. Let's get right into it.
Right out of the gate, we're looking at a foundational verse, Leviticus 5:5. It says, "When you are guilty in any of these ways, you must confess in what way you have sinned." Notice how explicit that is? It's telling us that recognizing our guilt has to be immediately followed by an honest confession of that specific sin. It's not just some vague general acknowledgement, right? We literally have to vocalize it. And honestly, this single verse totally sets the stage for everything we're going to explore today about how God wants us to handle conviction.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for this Explainer. First, the invitation of conviction. 2, the step-by-step response process. 3, the historical context of offerings. 4, meeting us in weakness. 5, practical steps for today. And we'll wrap up with number 6, our final conclusion and reflection.
So, kicking things off with Section 1, the invitation of conviction, God's revelation in our lives. You see, guilt isn't just about the massive, obvious mistakes. Leviticus 5 actually describes situations where people became guilty because of what they said, what they touched, or even just what they failed to do. I mean, sure, some of these were totally intentional, but others, they happened simply through carelessness or by accident or just plain human weakness. The key takeaway here is that once we become aware of our guilt, no matter how it happened, knowing what's right absolutely must lead to action.
So what does this all mean for us? Well, when God reveals something in our lives that needs to change, we really shouldn't ignore it. It's easy to think of conviction as a punishment meant to crush us. Actually, scratch that. It's the exact opposite. It is a direct invitation to respond to God and let Him transform us. Think of it like a hand-delivered opportunity for spiritual growth.
Moving on to Section 2, the step-by-step response process. Basically, how to act when you're convicted. Verses 1 through 6 lay out this incredibly clear step-by-step process. First up, you have to recognize the sin or the conviction. Second, and this is huge, don't pretend nothing happened. You've got to confess it honestly, without raising your defenses. And third, take direct action by bringing an offering. God didn't want the people just sitting around feeling bad about what they'd done. He required a tangible, honest response.
Now, because God often reveals our unhelpful attitudes or habits kind of gradually, we're basically faced with two opposing paths. Path 1 is our natural human instinct, right? Ignore the conviction, get defensive, or just explain it away. But path 2 is the one we're urged to take, responding with real humility. Honestly, our spiritual growth depends entirely on choosing that second path and just allowing God to show us what needs fixing.
Let's dive into Section 3, the historical context of offerings, jumping into Leviticus 5:7-13.
This is fascinating. There was an actual historical hierarchy for offerings. If you had standard means, a lamb was required. But what if you couldn't afford a lamb? Well, you could bring birds. And if you couldn't even afford birds, God allowed you to bring just a simple portion of flour. I love this because it proves something so profound about the character of God. He made a way for every single person to respond to their sin completely regardless of their bank account. The barrier to entry for forgiveness, literally removed.
And that brings us perfectly to Section 4, meeting us in weakness. This is all about God's grace and provision.
Just think about that for a second. Accepting a pinch of flour instead of a whole lamb. By doing this, God was making it crystal clear that He does not expect us to come to Him with some big, impressive gesture. He doesn't expect us to have our entire lives perfectly together before we approach Him. He simply wants a willing, honest heart. We just need to admit exactly where we're at and let Him lead us forward from that very spot.
Okay, let's get practical. Section 5, practical steps for today, living out the lesson.
So how do we actually live this out today? Well, the text gives us a few great steps. First, actively ask God to show you the areas of your life that need to change. Second, when you inevitably feel that conviction, fight the urge to immediately defend yourself. It's tough, I know, but don't explain it away. Third, come to God honestly, even if you're feeling super spiritually discouraged or weak. And finally, whatever you do, don't wait for perfection. A willing, imperfect action beats waiting for perfection every single time.
All right, wrapping up with Section 6, final conclusion and reflection. Respond when God speaks.
The big takeaway from all of this is incredibly clear. True obedience begins with a willing heart, not a perfect one. When God speaks, our only job is to listen, to respond with courage, And, just stop making excuses. We have to pay attention when He highlights something that needs to change, trusting that we can always come to Him, even in our absolute lowest moments of weakness.
So I want to leave you with this final provocative question to really chew on today. What is one step of obedience you can take right now in response to what God is showing you? Really think about it. What's something you might have been tempted to ignore lately? Well, don't ignore it anymore. Take that one step of obedience today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I truly hope it empowers you to step forward with humility and action.